All right, I'm here with Rico Cortes, and I would like to. Today, I was wanting to get into just what it means to be grafted in. I've got some teachings, and I know Jim Staley does a really good teaching on just who is Israel, and I believe his teaching is called Identity Crisis. But some people get to the point where they think maybe I'm not part of one of the original 10 northern tribes, but that's okay because even if you weren't originally a bloodline Israelite, you can still be grafted in. So I just wanted to get into that today. But I think a lot of this starts in Romans 11, verse 11. It says, So I ask, did they stumble in order that they may fall? By no means. Rather, through the trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, how much more with their full inclusion mean? Now I am speaking to you Gentiles, insomuch then as I am an apostle to Gentiles, I magnify my ministry, in order somehow to make my fellow Jews jealous, and thus save some of them. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? So, first of all, one thing I'm noticing there, and I believe actually in Romans 10 it mentions it too, it talks about provoking them to jealousy. What does that actually mean by that? Are we provoking them to jealousy? What is it talking about here in this part?
Well, I think, first of all, thanks for having me. And, one of the things that happens in the book of Romans is that sometimes we try to give an explanation devoid of its cultural backgrounds. So if you give me a few minutes to give you what was going on in the Greco-Roman world, specifically at the time and the reasons why Paul wrote it that way. This is the one thing people don't think about. Now we can utilize the letter of Romans to convey a message of how we're grafted in, we have identity. I got you. But we have to ask the question, what was the motivation behind the apostle writing this letter? How come he's writing it, but yet he's never been there before? What is going on in the scope of Greco-Roman world that forced him to bring an encouragement to the church in Rome? And that's the one thing that hardly really anyone really tackles when they're talking about this. Which if you don't connect the context of it, then it would open a lot of doors for speculation. And that's why we have a big different type of consensus. We have different type of opinions about the book of Romans, and it brings a lot of confusion because we're talking to a Roman audience that we don't know, in the Roman language, in the Latin that we don't understand, written by an expert in the Torah, giving an encouragement about something that is going on that we don't know. So if you give me like 5 minutes, I try to give you a little background on the reasons why Paul wrote the letter. And by the way, when you read chapter 1, 2, 3, and beginning in chapter 3 all the way to chapter 9, he is actually giving you an incredible an explanation as to how God justified all of humanity, not only Jewish people, and how the master plan of God was to restore humanity back to the garden through his righteousness. That's why it says, for the righteousness of God apart from the law. And many people use those verses in chapter 3, verse 21 to 25, as to say that God no longer wants people to follow the law. And that's not what it's saying. Now, before I get into this, I'd like to preface by saying this. The whole motivation of Paul is trying to explain to the Jews in Rome and to the Gentiles in Rome who were believers in Yeshua that God is no respecter person, that the master plan of salvation is for all of humanity, but that people out of covenant, like people coming from the nations, now they have an obligation to come in and graft themselves into the natural olive tree, which is Israel. Now, the problem is today, people don't want to look like Israel. They want the benefit, the blessing, salvation, reconciliation, redemption, and justification. But when the moment they start looking like Israel, now the whole thing about Pharisees and Judaism and they're missing the point. Okay, so Claudius was an emperor, and Claudius expelled all the Jews from Rome. Basically, got rid of them. Aquila and Priscilla and Aquila met Paul in Corinth because the Bible tells in the book of Acts that they got expelled. Year 52, I think, of the Common Era. Now, Paul was in Corinth for 2 years. Now, what's interesting is that I think in the year 54, Claudius gets killed. He got murdered by his wife, I think. So now they're allowed to come back. Now, remember that the Gentiles who believed, you got a problem because you live in Rome and all your social status and your honor was based on which other God you worship. It's called imperial worship, imperial cult. I'm going to give you a different interpretation, hopefully so different that you probably may have never heard, but doesn't mean that it's not there. It's just we haven't been considered. Okay, so in the Roman Empire, you have what is called imperial worship, imperial cult. It's the worship of the emperor, and they have thousands of gods. So when a Gentile will believe in Yeshua as kurios, that's why Romans chapter 10 verse 9, Paul wrote in a very interesting structure that if you confess with your mouth, it's an oath that Yeshua is your kurios, Lord, Master, Owner. Now, what's interesting is in the Septuagint, the word kurios is always in reference to the Father. And it makes sense because, God is Ribono Shel Olam. He's the master of the universe. We got that. So, but in the first century, according to this resource right here, which is called The Lord of the Entire World by Fenton, he actually tells you that in the first century, the word kurios was also applied to the power of the emperor. So now we have a clash of cultures. Paul is trying to convey who Yeshua is as the Son of God and the access that God has given us through Yeshua to become him, God appointing Yeshua to be our master, who's righteous, who is good, who is kind, compared to the emperor, the oppressor, and the murderer, and the, who persecutes people. Okay? So now you have a clash of cultures. The moment you believe in Yeshua, that's treason to the emperor if you're a Gentile. If you're Jewish, it's not treason to the Gentiles. To the emperor, because Augustus Caesar had a decrease of giving privileges to the Jewish people in the Greco-Roman world. One of them was the freedom of worship. They could worship in their synagogue. They could follow their feasts. They could keep the Sabbath. They could even send the half shekel to Israel, or they can even go to Israel and celebrate the feast there, as long as they worship within the collegia, which is what is called their own association, or they have permission. They could do that. Now, when Paul got thrown out of the synagogue because of Yeshua, if you read in the book of Acts chapter 17, and when they were in Ephesus, it's like the Jewish people saying, hey, this guy is enticing the Jews to believe in this Jesus, right? And Yeshua, and, which is against the decrees of Rome. Because that particular communities, they will pledge allegiance to the emperor through a covenantal oath. Now I understand why Paul is saying in a covenantal language, if you confess with your mouth that Yeshua is your master, not the emperor, and you believe that God raised him from the dead, then you shall be saved, because the emperor has no power. Only the God of Israel does through his son Yeshua. So now, I'm giving you a foundation to understand what's going on here. So when the Jews get exiled from Rome, they get kicked out. Now all you have left are the Gentile congregation, without the evidence of Jewish people, believers in Yeshua, and the community. And by the way, there's evidence. There's actually information, historical information, that the reason why the Jews got expelled from Rome was because of the controversies with Christus, which, by the way, the scholars say it was the issue of Christos, means Christ or Messiah. So therefore, it becomes a stumbling block. That's why First Peter talks about Yeshua being the stumbling block, because he became a stumbling block to the Gentiles, because now you have to choose between Yeshua and the emperor, which will cause a lot of chaos, because then you cannot have a job, you cannot buy, you cannot sell. You have a problem in the social status of honor and shame and things like that. And the Jewish people, now they have a problem, because accepting Yeshua as their master and Messiah, if they had allegiance to Rome so they can have free worship, they just accepted another Lord. Now we're in trouble. Because you see, Israel was under the Roman authority, and Herod was actually a vassal to Rome. Now, it's interesting when people talk about Romans 11, they never consider the historical cultural background to get a better foundation to what the message is going to be now. So imagine if you are out of Rome and the only people left over are the Gentiles, and now they have to fight with their own Roman people because they are perceived to be traitors by not worshiping the emperor in imperial worship. Because if you follow Yeshua, you only worship God, you know? Now you have, and then they come back. There's a struggle of power. In other words, yeah, you haven't been here, we're here, and now they're boasting. Just like today, people are boasting against Jewish people because we believe in Yeshua. It's exactly the same problem. Now, Paul, he is writing a beautiful letter, and he is ending up in the middle of it, telling them about salvation. Salvation is of the Jews, the covenants of the Jews. And then he says in chapter 10 that, the goal of the Torah is Messiah. He's trying to let them know, and the battle is not really about the 10 tribes. And that's one thing that I needed to reevaluate as I'm reading the chapter. The battle was about the problem internally between the Jewish believers or the Jewish synagogues who did not believe in Yeshua and the Jewish believers and the Gentile believers who are grafting themselves into it. Paul is bringing correction. Paul is bringing, like saying, you just came in yesterday, dude. You need to graft yourself into the tree, right? And you're not boasting against the natural branches because you were grafted in. In other words, so many people, and Paul says something in Romans. Let me see if I go over there. When verse 13 forward, right? When you're going to, listen to what it says in verse, can you read verse 16?
Verse 16, Romans 11.
Actually, read, Romans 11, verse 13, focusing on verse 16, okay?
Okay. Now I am speaking to you Gentiles, insomuch then as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry, in order somehow to make my fellow Jews jealous, and thus save some of them. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world...
There. You see, if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, that's so overlooked when we read that. That's the message of Yeshua, bringing the reconciliation. That's why the book of Genesis begins the way the book of Revelation ends, from garden to garden. The book of Genesis ends with the dispersion. The book of Revelation begins with the dispersion. It's all returning to the garden. It's all about, how can we restore Adam, all of humanity. And also when Adam was created, therefore there was no Jewish people. When Abraham, there was no Jewish people. Noah, there was no Jewish people. So the plan of God is for all of humanity, but he utilizes Israel and the Jewish people in this case as a vehicle to lead them into the garden. But they're not doing a good job. They're not doing a good job either. Just like we're not doing a good job today. In other words, we are taking God's tree and we are not really sharing the proper fruit, or many are eating of their own tree, the tree of knowledge, sin and evil. So therefore, the whole message is the whole thing you're arguing. But all this is a master plan of God to bring reconciliation to the whole world. And it says, what will their acceptance mean except life from the dead? In other words, Paul is saying, you don't understand. These people are in covenant. These are covenantal people. You just came in yesterday. This is all the master plan of God to bring a reconciliation to everyone. And you're not boasting against the natural branches. And you natural branches are like belittling the grafted in. This is a whole issue. It's the same problem we have today. Exactly the same problem. How can I prove it? There's people within the movement that now say, oh, their calendar doesn't work. Ours is the way. The way they use the name doesn't work. It's ours the way we do. Or we don't want to study this and this because that's rabbinical. It's the same problem. We all came in yesterday. The movement is not 100 years old. The way we have it right now is less than 100 years old. The way we have it right now. Not I'm talking about, you know what I mean, what is called Hebrew roots or Messianic. There's always been a remnant of them throughout the ages, but the way it's called today is less than 50 years. So we still have the same problem. Now, watch this, and it's in verse 16. Now, if the first fruit is holy, so also the whole batch and dough. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. Now, if some of the branches were broken off, and you, he's talking out to Gentiles, although you, while a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them and became a sharer. A sharer. No one wants to talk about the sharer of the root. Okay, of the olive tree's richness. Do not boast against the branches. He is saying, guys, you're fighting with each other. Stop it. You don't support yourself. Is that making sense?
Yep.
You see, you don't support yourself. You need each other. So you're boasting against those guys, but then you just came in, you don't even know how to walk. So I'm going to show you something as I keep reading here, that is really, really important that I never knew until I began to look into horticulture in the first century. First century, looking into plants and stuff. If you boast against them, you do not support the root, but the root supports you. Then you will say, branches were broken off in order that I could be grafted in. Remember, and this is interesting because I never really caught on to this. It says, then you will say. That's not Paul saying. He having a rhetorical conversation. He is saying, then you will say, the branches were broken off that I could be grafted in. Wow, how prophetic is that? Right? Well said. They were broken off because of unbelief, but you stand firm because of faith. Do not think arrogant thoughts, but be afraid. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. See, then, the kindness of severity of God, severity upon those who have fallen, but upon you, the kindness of God, if you continue in his kindness. For otherwise, you will also be cut off. All right? Now, what's interesting, in verse 24, for if you were cut off from what is by nature, a wild olive tree, and contrary to nature, let me ask you a question. Have you ever looked into why Paul says contrary to nature? When I read that, you know what I did? I started looking into horticulture in the first century and about wild olive branches and a wild olive tree or a natural one, right? And it says, contrary to nature, were grafted into a cultivated olive tree. How much more will these who are natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? Very interesting, because now he's talking about all of Israel, and he's saying, don't you think you got it going on? Because, you both need each other. And if God cut them off because of unbelief, what do you think he's going to do with you? You were not in any covenantal relationship before. It's a great letter of correction. I'm sorry about that. It's a great letter of correction that he's bringing to them. Now, this is a kicker. Wild olive branches. Normally, you will graft a natural branch into a wild olive because the wild olive tree, the wild olive tree, it's only good for burning. Its fruit is bitter. It doesn't give you good fruit. So you will graft the other way around so that now you will be able to expand, and that natural branch has the richness of all, then can provide the substance that the wild olive can go. It's only good for burning. Now think about that for a minute. It's a wild olive, and that means that it's like an oil type tree. I think it's oriander. It's called in the Bible. Okay, if you look into trees and stuff and plants. So think about what he just did. He's telling you, you're a wild olive branch. You're only good for burning. You don't have no fruit on yourself. In order for you to provide and to have fruit is to join yourself with the natural branches, and they will support you. And that's a powerful message of encouragement or reconciliation between arguments. It's trying to let you know you need each other. And because you showed up yesterday and you don't understand all the principles, these guys have been around for a while. I mean, consider that you need one another. And that's one of the part of the message that I don't think has been addressed. If you really think about it, that's not really been taught that way before, because we use it as saying, you see, we are the 10 tribes who are coming back. And I think it's part of it. But remember that the people who went to Israel after Pompey conquered were Jewish. They were taken captive there as slaves, and later on they became part of the community and things like that. They were not really the 10 tribes. The 10 tribes went actually to Assyria, and then they scattered all over the world and Asia Minor. So now we have a problem of content and context and who we're talking about. This is why I have to reevaluate the way I was presenting it before, because when I got into the cultural background and the historical accounts, I'm missing something here. Now the message can still be the same. We're grafted into it. The problem is we don't want to provide the fruit that the natural branches do. Because if I pick up my siddur, right? This is the problem. If I pick up this siddur and I open it and I do a prayer, immediately I'm rabbinical. And 90% of this book actually is a structure from the temple. Yeshua would have used a prayer book in the synagogue. So therefore, we want the benefit of the tree, but we don't want to do what the tree does in this case. I hope that makes sense. And I'm not making an argument for the religion of Judaism. That's not the argument there. What I'm trying to let you know that there's a context. I came to this country back in 1979. I had to learn the language. I have an accent. I can't do anything about it, but I know your history. I know civics. I know the Bill of Rights. I've studied the Constitution. That's why I'm a law-abiding citizen. I literally grafted myself into your country. You know, I love the United States. I'm a U.S. citizen from birth, but I was part of the Commonwealth. I was not really a native born. Then when I came to the United States, I said, well, I'm in the United States. I'm never going to lose my identity as a Puerto Rican, but I am here and I need to adapt myself to the environment without losing who I am. But I'm adapting myself. So I learned your language, your history, your culture. I traveled 40 states and I love the United States. That doesn't mean I stop eating rice and beans, you know? So this is the thing that we're confused about. Look, in Israel, you have Mizrahi, you have Yemenites, you have Ashkenazi, you have Sephardics, you have Iranian Jews, Iraqi Jews, I'm sorry, and Jews from Iran. You have Jews from all over the world. And what's amazing to me is they all have their dialects and their languages, and they speak it among themselves. But when it comes time for prayer, they all pray the same things. When they do the Shabbat, reception of Shabbat, they all sing the same things. When they meet for the feast, they all do the same things. But yet they have different cultures and they're all united together as one people and one voice. And I think that's the message Paul is trying to convey, trying to get them back to. What does it mean to be grafted in? Well, Ephesians tells us, Paul tells the Ephesians, completely different. It's in the Asia Minor, modern day Turkey. And he's saying, guys, you're part of the Commonwealth of Israel. Stop fighting with the identity with Artemis and Diana. You know, I mean, have you ever studied the trade guilds they used to have there? Trade guilds are associations. Okay, so therefore, if you work for a particular job, and then they have trade guilds, and everything was based on what group you belong to, your whole honor status, your social status, your honor was based on who you belong to. Well, the problem is this: each trade guild, they have allegiance to a god, and they have to do rituals to the god. They have to do sacrifices to the god, and they have to pray to the god. If you did not do it, then you lost your job. Now you cannot buy or sell. People never heard about that either, and it's in the historical books. So now imagine what Paul is conveying to the Ephesians. Hey guys, remember that you were once away from the covenants of promise, but now through Yeshua the Messiah, you are now one in the Messiah, and you are now part of the Commonwealth of Israel. In other words, your kingdom is God's kingdom. It's not the emperor. And that's just some of the things that I teach that maybe give you another perspective about the wild olive branches. So my question to you will be, the Bible says, and Paul says, that we're grafted into the olive tree. We need to find out who is the olive tree and what do they do and how can they support me? And that's a question I don't think people ask.
Just yesterday in our fellowship, we were reading the Torah portion, and it just so happens to be on the current Torah portion. You've got, we just read about the Passover, and they're getting ready to leave Egypt. And one thing that people I don't think realize is it wasn't just the Hebrew people that left. Some Egyptians came with them. They were essentially getting grafted in at that time. And what did it say? It said that even if people come with them, I mean, they get the same inheritance, they get the same portion, but they've got the same conditions as the Hebrew people did.
Absolutely. And by the way, yeah, that's a great point you bring. It's called the El Rab. The El Rab. It's a mixed multitude, right? Mixed multitude. And what was the condition for them to leave Egypt? They survived, So that means that they have to get circumcised. And by the way, Joshua tells you that everyone, Joshua chapter 5, I think, or 3, I can't remember, says that everyone that left Egypt in the first generation, they were all circumcised. So they wanted to survive and be redeemed. They abide by the rules of the natural tree. And that's the one thing, that's why we have so much chaos. We want to now, okay, let me ask you this, and this is going to prove the point. Let me ask you this. How do you like knowing? In California, I don't know if you know about this, but in California, they have like I think it's a 4% tax on your meals when you go eat somewhere. Okay, I saw it this morning, actually. In that you go have a meal and they charge you 4%. It could be of your bill. Now, it's not part of the meal. You know what the 4% is? That's not including the tip, by the way. The 4% there is so that you can help pay the insurance for the servers. But they're giving free insurance to illegal aliens who have no allegiance, no swearing of allegiance to this country, and they're going to pay free health care to illegal aliens. But yet, the restaurants now, they have to charge a percentage to the clients to try to take care of their servers. Now we are paying for the insurance on top of the meal and the tip. How about that? That's oppression. And that's what we do when we try to come into God's kingdom and determine and tell people what to do, and we refuse to graft ourselves into the olive tree. But again, now today, if we say that, they'll tell you, oh, well, that means you got to convert to Judaism. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is you live a lifestyle according to the Torah. And the more you do it, the more you look like the natural branches. It's just, I could be observant and I could just still believe in Yeshua and not be part of the religion of Judaism. But whatever I practice according to the Torah, temple service, and the requirements, then obviously I'm going to look like them. And that's the problem people are having. So is it really bad grafting ourselves into the olive tree, or is it grafting ourselves limited to our feelings of replacement theology or anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish sentiment that's still prevalent within the movement? That's the question. Let's go to the root of the problem. And people don't want to address that.
One thing that when I first come into this walk, like I'd mentioned, there's the teaching like identity crisis and just learning who Israel is and everything. And one thing that I got kind of caught up in was, I need to trace my root. Am I really one of the 10 lost tribes dispersed among the Gentiles? Am I really Ephraim? And I got really worked up on that. And the bloodline isn't what necessarily matters. And one thing that I thought was interesting, because in Revelation it talks about Millennial Kingdom. It's got 12 gates, the 12 tribes. There's no Gentile. There's no like Gentile gate, essentially. And I was worried. I'm like, well, will I be going through Asher? Will I be going through Zebulun, Simeon? What? But in Ezekiel 47,
verse 21 to 423.
Exactly. Yes. Going. It says, so you shall.
I've been doing this a while, man. I've been doing this a little bit, so I pretty much understand where you're at. I've been through that process too.
It says that essentially you will be an allotted inheritance with them, and whoever you settle with, you get to be part of Asher. You get to be part of Naphtali or whoever. It doesn't matter.
Kind of relaxed you, didn't
it? At all.
Well, it kind of relaxed you, right?
Yeah, it is. Because, I mean, if you think about it, no matter where you are from, even if you are originally part of one of those, you could be part of three mixed up, because just races and everything mix all together. So it doesn't matter.
Have you ever considered Paul as an immigration lawyer?
I guess
when you study his letters, study his letters, looking at it from a immigration issue. He's trying to actually tell people. That's why in the book of Galatians is beautiful, because he states his case. And by the way, have you ever studied the caste system of Rome? It's I highly recommend you consider that, because in Rome they had a caste system. Okay, they have what's called the patricians, the emperor. Then you have the elite, and then you have the patricians, plebeians, the freedmen, and the slaves. And mainly from the slave and the freedmen, they gravitated towards the gospel. A few plebeians did, later in the Roman Empire, more so, less in the first 100 years. But when you understand the caste system, then you understand why Paul says there's neither Jew or Gentile, no slave or freedman, no man or woman, for we are all one in Messiah. And if we are all one, then we are sons of Abraham. That's very important language that someone from the Greco-Roman world who understood the caste system would have known this. So let's pretend you're a slave and I'm a patrician. I'm like a really elite. During the week, I will not sit with you. I will not eat with you. I will not talk to you because you will be below me, beneath me in status. And honor and shame was huge in the first century. But now you got a problem. You believe in Yeshua. I believe in Yeshua. Paul is the leader. You go to the congregation on Shabbat. And we have to talk to each other. We have to deal with each other as equals. And that's why Paul is bringing the correction. You're trying to gain salvation through circumcision when the circumcision is a sign. It's not for salvation. And these guys are telling you that to be saved, you have to do this. God doesn't say that. Salvation comes as a gift from God. The circumcision is a sign of a covenantal relationship. So now Paul is saying your welcoming into the kingdom is about justification. That's why the book of Galatians is all about justification. How are you justified to be in the kingdom? And then Paul goes on in chapter 2, verse 11. He goes on getting all over Peter, and he tells him, hey, you're a hypocrite, dude. And then he starts stating the case in favor of the Gentiles, how they have the right to be in the kingdom as long as they do what the Torah says. Exactly what Acts 15 is all about. We don't care about context. And you're right. When you come in, I went through that process. I know who I'm from. I got my DNA done. And you know what it did for me? It gave me refocus. Now, because I'm from Puerto Rico, we have more of an idea where we came from. Okay. But to me, it wasn't about, oh, I got to be part of Israel. For me, it was like, what if I am? And if I am, what is my role? So now that I know who I am, I'm going, okay, fine. I'm sticking to my role. He just simplified it for me. But that doesn't mean it cannot be the same for you. So you already got that the Bible says that whatever you graft yourself into, then you have an inheritance. Very important, right? So it's like Paul is trying to convey the message saying, guys, these guys are Gentiles. They live by faith, man. They believe that they will have an inheritance. They will have a name. They will have the honor you have in God's kingdom. Let's welcome them in. And they don't need to be part of the 10 tribes because, like you just read in Ezekiel, that will take care of itself when they go into the kingdom. They get to choose from which tribe they want to be part of because the kingdom of God is with the 12 tribes, not with a spiritual Israel. You know what I'm saying? Hopefully this is making sense. But it's a different take of what we understood. And I do believe that, about the olive tree and all that. I'm with you. It's just that sometimes we are so hyper-focused on the 10 tribes, when in fact, he's talking to only the Jews in Rome, not the 10 tribes. Now, Peter is talking to the dispersed, and James is talking to the dispersed in the text. It tells you in the first 2 verses in each book. So now we understand who the audience is. Then we have to find out what the problem is. And then we know who we belong to. Now, let me ask you a question. If they were all Israelites, which I used to believe that back in 98, 99, 2000, 2001, and 2, I used to believe that all the Christians were the lost sheep of Israel. I was wrong because I started reading the Bible and saying, well, wait a minute. If they are all part of the 10 tribes, then why do they need adoption? If you're part of the 10 tribes, you don't need to be adopted. You're already part of the family. That adoption already happened with Jacob and Ephraim and Manasseh back in the day. So that made me think. I said, wait a second. I'm missing something. Yes, they are the 10 tribes. And yes, within the Christian world, there are many who are part of the 10 tribes that don't even know it. But should it really matter? Or should we just going to separate the message only for those who are the 10 tribes and forget about the Gentiles? Remember, the plan of God is a reconciliation of the whole world, all of humanity. Hopefully that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really don't have a whole lot more to add to it, but kind of along the same lines, and it even says it here in Romans 11, whether you're part of them or not, you could be originally part of the 10 tribes and go astray, but it even mentions you can even be regrafted in. Not just a tree that wasn't even part of it being grafted in, but how much more could one that once was broken off be regrafted in it all as well? So I thought that was pretty beautiful way of seeing it as
You
well.
know, yes, sir. I think the Lord is trying to let us know about His mercy, and then it's all about obedience and disobedience. And I'm just grateful that we received that message, that we eventually reached us, so that we can choose to be grafted into and live according to God's kingdom.
So, is there anything else you would like to just add that maybe a lot of people don't really get on this topic?
Well, I mean, what I recommend to people is to consider that when you read the New Testament, and it's something that I'm really emphasizing lately, is trying to, at a glance, not look at it from my understanding. There are a lot of things that we deal with in the historical context that we need to consider. You know, it's like I mentioned a few things to you, and they are topics of cultural backgrounds. For example, the next 2 weeks, I'm making a trip to Turkey, Asia Minor, Greece, and Rome, and we're going to be talking about, you know, the seven churches and the message. And when you read the seven churches, you can speculate all you want about what it's trying to tell you, what the message is. But once you go there, then you understand what the message meant. But the writer, John, is utilizing the culture, is using what's going on in the cities, their religions, and even their geographical location to send the message. Let me give you an example. You know, the message to Laodicea, right, says, I wish that you were either hot or cold, but not lukewarm, right?
Yep.
And we get an interpretation of that. We say, well, you see, you either commit to God or you don't, but you don't want to be because he'll vomit you out of your mouth, right? Out of his mouth. Well, that's so connected with the culture there and the topography. You see, 6 miles north and 10 miles south of Laodicea here, you have two towns. One of them in the north has thermals, springs, and it's extremely hot. And in the south, in Colossal, then you're going to have rivers that had extreme cold water. So they used to draw water in Laodicea from those two places, right? By the time it got through the huge water system that they had, it was lukewarm. It was warm. It was no longer either hot or cold. So what the writer, in this case, Yeshua, is the one speaking to John about the churches. He is saying, he's using their location to convey to the audience their spiritual condition. But if you never go there and you never study the context, you're never going to know the topography and what that's all about. You see? So now you have another perspective of the Bible that I was trying to show you in Romans 11. That when you read something about the olive, first is how we studied horticulture in the Mediterranean Sea, in the Mediterranean. How does the olive tree works? What is a wild olive branch and wild olive tree? What are they good for? You know, I thought about all kinds of stuff and I began to search it out. Because obviously Paul is using something physical to bring a spiritual message. So these are the examples. And then when I found out about the trouble in Rome as to why, I mean, my question was, why were the Jews expelled? They lived in Rome forever. So what did they do? You know, when they had all these privileges and things like that. And then after Claudius died, he got murdered, they welcomed them back. So I'm thinking, surely there had to be something. And then I found out that the whole issue was the arguments about Yeshua, about Messiah. It created a huge riffraff between Gentiles who believe and Jews who believe against the Jews who didn't. And because the Jews that didn't had a lot of influence, and they did not want to lose their privileges in the Roman Empire, what would they do? They start turning them in. You know, I mean, that happened many years later in Smyrna, Pergamon. I'm sorry. In Pergamon, there was a bishop, one of the early church fathers, I think Polycarp, I think it was him, who actually got turned in by the Jews, and he was martyred there. So, you know, again, there are some real issues, real people, real problems that when we look at the Bible from the Western perspective, we never even consider. And I would love for the audience to look at that a little bit more before we come up with our own ideas and interpretations, and then we have to correct. And sometimes we don't really want to correct it. It's too difficult. We already dug a trench. You know what I mean? It's,
Well, now I don't want to shift it too much, but I know this
okay, you can do whatever you want. It's all right.
this is something that you've done several teachings on, so you're very well versed in this area. But I mentioned earlier the in Revelation where it mentions the temple and 12 gates, and I know you've done a lot of study on the temple yourself. Just this past week, I actually watched a teaching you did. I think it was from several years ago, but there was something that I'd always wondered about, and you actually kind of addressed there in Matthew 24. Whenever he's showing them the temple, he says, "You see these? Not one stone is going to be left upon another." And today,
Yeah.
the Western Wall, as we know it, the Wailing Wall, you got a whole wall there. I'm like, I don't get it. It said not one stone, but there's still a whole thing. Now, your interpretation, I believe this is right. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that not the actual correct look?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, here you have to look into archaeology. If you allow me, can you make me a co-host so I can share the screen with you?
Let me.
If you go to my name on the side,
Yeah.
right click,
Okay.
and there you can make me a co-host.
Okay. All right. There we go.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to show you my temple app. Then I'm going to give you an idea. Let me set it up here real quick.
Yep.
Before we go, so you can see what I mean. Okay.
There was another.
Okay. So
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
It's not co-hosting.
Oh, okay.
I cannot share it.
Um.
Look to your right and hit on your make host. Oh,
It said.
yeah, you did.
Made a host.
Yeah, you did. Hold on. Let me share it. Got it. You did. You did. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay. So this is my app. Let me know when you can see it.
Yep, I can see it.
Can you see it? Okay. That's my temple app. Okay. Me and my teachers. My teacher. His name is Joseph Good. Okay. So in the book of Ezekiel, it talks about on the Temple Mount, Harabite. It's like there was a 500 by 500 in which is the temple was encased by a 500 by 500 wall. So the city, the Temple Mount was expanded from Solomon, and then when the Nehemiah came back and Ezra came back and those people, they fixed a few things, and then when the Hasmonean family took control, they expanded to the south. That's the only way you can really expand at the time, because there was the Bethesda valleys in the north at the time of Solomon and Ezra and Nehemiah. You cannot expand north. Okay, so the Hasmonean family expanded to the south. And by the way, in the eastern wall, when you walk it, you can see the expansion. You can literally see it on the wall. You have the seam, you have the joint, you have all that stuff. When Herod came into power, one of the things he wanted to do was he started building stuff and renovating things. So one of the things was the Temple Mount. So he added to the north, to the south, to the west. So what you see today in the south, in the north, part of the eastern, southeastern corner, and on the north are the retaining walls for Herodian expansion. So you see those walls right there in front of you?
Yes.
Okay, none of those walls exist today. Now, please understand that this wall right here looks like 32 feet high. They were huge. Now, the Mishnah tells you that there were doors. There were 5 doors east over here, and we are looking at those 2 that's in the south, and then there's one here on the west. So you see my cursor right here?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, this is what the western wall will be today. This was added from this wall here on my cursor to this edge over here. It was the Herodian expansion. Now, it becomes part of the Temple Mount. It's not the temple itself. Follow?
Yep.
So what I mean is this. Look at my cursor. What the cursor is holy ground as part of the temple complex. But going through the doors in here is holier than outside of the wall here. When you go through this fence, you see that little fence on the cursor?
Yep.
This Paul got arrested in the book of Acts chapter 21 because he was accused of taking Trophimus through that gate. It's not into the temple. It was through the Zoreg, which, by the way, I'm going to see the archaeological remnant of the Zoreg, the second one. I seen the first one in the Jerusalem Museum. The second one, I'm going to see it in 3 weeks in Istanbul, in the museum. Is there because they found it in 1781, and the Ottoman Empire, they dominated Jerusalem at the time, so they took all that evidence back to the museum. Okay, so what people don't realize is the expansion, the construction of the expansions, and the levels of holiness. So once you get through this fence, only Israelites can get through there. In certain areas, only women can go. Women can only go to so far, and then men can go so far, Israelites. Then Levites can go so far, then the priest can go, and then only the high priest can go into the Holy of Holies. So in every levels of holiness, like your house, for example, if I go visit you, I'm not allowed to just trespass without you inviting me. You can shoot me according to United States law. If I go in with intent to harm you, right? You can defend. But if I cross your gate, I enter your sacred space. Then I knock on your door. Now, if you ask me to come into your house, it was grace that allowed me to come into your house because I'm not in covenant with you. I'm not a family member. So, but if I go into your house, I'm not just going to go walk all over your house without permission, or open the refrigerator, or tell your wife what to cook, or lay on your bed. I mean, you will kick me out. So there's levels of kedusha, holiness in your house, sacred space. Your kids' rooms is sacred space. Your room is sacred space. You probably have an area where your whole family meets, and maybe the place where you eat, sacred space. Well, the temple functions the same way. The Holy of Holies is the most sacred. The holy place, sacred. The area of the priest, sacred. The area of Israel, sacred. The area of the women, sacred. And there are levels of holiness, and the Gentile cannot go in. They're not in covenant. So it's only restricted to covenantal people. And that's how we know. So here what you see is basically the expansion of the wall from the western wall here. This is the original western wall, by the way. As a matter of fact, let me jump. I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to jump down, okay? And we're going to take a little tour. So as I'm walking, I'm going to walk between the original western wall, which is to my right, and on the left, the portico, and then the modern day western wall. But on the inside, you follow?
Yep.
I'm going to tell you exactly where the western wall is today. We are inside where the western wall will be right now, right here.
Okay.
We are inside. We're looking from east to west now, inside of it. Normally, you look from the outside in. You follow? Okay. So watch. You see that door through there?
Yes.
Let me take you. I could take you when I go to Israel. I take tours, and I take people to this place. So Lean Rittmeyer, we're walking north. Lean Rittmeyer, in his archaeology, based on the book of Nehemiah and the discoveries on the Temple Mount by Dr. Benjamin Mazar, Elat Mazar, they found a cornerstone in the northeast that is called the man. I just went blank. That, in other words, that was the most northern corner of the northeast at the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay, now the time I hear it. So here we are. All right. So if I'm standing here looking to the west, if I turn around and I look to the east, right, that stone is all the way in that corner over here with the last little bitty arch in there. Okay, and it was actually, and Nehemiah did it on purpose, because of what the Persian king did, sending the Jews back from the Persians after the conquest of the Babylonians. He left a row of 9 stones, and the finish of the stones is of the Persian style. So you have 3 different styles. You have the Herodian style, which is like back in the time of the Roman Empire, they have the finish. Then you have the Hasmonean style, and then you have the Persian style of finish in buildings. So if you understand masonry and archaeology, you can go through Jerusalem and know the differences. You know, oh, this is from the Hasmonean period. This is from the Persian period. This is from the Byzantine period, and this is from the Herodian period. You can actually know the time frame, and then it's pretty cool because it may not be interesting to your audience, but to me, it's really interesting when I'm walking through in the old city, and then all of a sudden on the Temple Mount, and when I'm walking around the Temple Mount, I see a stone from the 1st century being used as a secondary use in another building. And then you go like, oh, that had to be after the destruction. And then you do your research. Sure enough. Okay. So what I did, I take my tours, and I have that little. This is what happened here? It's not giving me the picture. Interesting. Wonder why. I took a picture of the original Western Wall. Literally, I could take you to over here today. Archaeologists found the northwest corner of the original Western Wall. Right here. And I could take you there. And then you know, if you go 500 cubits down, then 500 cubits, you know that anything to the right and to the south of that, it was added. And that's the reason why many people do not understand the chapter 24 Matthew, because they're not aware of the architecture, the archaeology validating that if I go here, you see how high that wall is? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if I go outside of the wall, let's just say, for argument's sake, okay, that, let me take you to a different place, because if not, it's not going to make any sense. I'm going to take you to the steps going on to the eastern, the first century eastern gate. Okay? All right. So you see how tall the building was?
Yes.
That building was 22 stories high. That's pretty big. But yet, if I was standing over here, and that wall on my left is probably 36 feet high from where I'm standing, but it's like 200 feet from the bedrock all the way up. Well, notice this. I'm going to turn towards the temple. Remember, this is made to scale. Can you see the temple building there?
Yeah.
No, this is the temple entrance.
Oh.
You cannot see the temple building. It is said that you will stand right outside the entrance and not see the building because it's all on elevation. Here, 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 here. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you will be at the bottom and then you cannot see the top. Okay, now keep that in mind, because then when we go outside that wall, when we go outside this wall, let me actually go a little quicker. I'm sorry. Let me go to the royal store. The royal store right here. If I'm walking away, you see the wall right here? Mm-hmm. If I'm walking away, even here, can I see the temple building?
Not from there, no.
Yeah, because that wall was very high.
Yeah.
So what if I submit to you that everything Yeshua says was destroyed on the Temple Mount? This wall, there's no remnant of it anymore. The temple building, no remnant anymore. Nothing. Only some evidence from the bedrock that we know because of archaeology, we can tell what everything is based on the cisterns. But literally the prophecy came true. Now, the retaining walls, that's not part of temple. It's part of the Temple Mount context. But this wall was completely destroyed. There's no remnant of that wall today. And the Bible talks about that wall, and we have the evidence that talks about the wall. None of these buildings are there today. So the prophecy was fulfilled. But the people who don't study archaeology don't know the difference between the retaining wall versus the original walls that Ezekiel talks about 500 by 500. So now I gave you a little longer explanation, but I wanted you to know more or less where I was coming from.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I know you're gonna have to go here in a few minutes. I just had one quick last question, and you can do it real short if you want. But everyone nowadays, it seems like they're big into eschatology, and everyone's thinking there's going to be a third temple built and everything. And how long would it take? In your just own estimation, do you believe there will be an actual stone third temple built, or could it be something like the original tent of meeting in the
It
last?
cannot be the tent of meeting.
Okay.
That's what people they need to get rid of that. That is really nonsense. People are saying that people are proposing that they don't study the temple, and I don't mean to be so cutting to the point, but that makes no sense. I mean, uh, all you need is the altar. The altar. Now, my teacher and I, we don't necessarily agree on the point, but we agree on 99.9% of it. It's just that I told him, I said, I believe that what you need, we have the precedent when Ezra came back was Zerubbabel and Joshua the high priest, that they built the altar and they started doing the sacrifices because the temple, they needed to remodel it. Okay. The moment you build the altar, first you need to take the Temple Mount. You cannot have the mosque. No, I'm sorry, the golden dome, and nothing connected with the temple because that's God doesn't share His glory with anything, and He's not going to do that. That's the worst thing you can do. Okay, so we need to have the Temple Mount. Once we do, we know where the altar will go. We already know where it will be located. It has to be on the same spot. It cannot be any other place. Because when they came back from Babylon, Ezra, they built the altar in exactly the same place where the other one was. That's a Torah law. It has to be, okay, instructions. So what happens is, I believe, this is my opinion. They have the plans of temple. They have everything in order to start trying to get it done. They even have priests. They have Levites ready. They have all that stuff. There are 3 red heifers that could be slaughtered. One of them can be slaughtered any moment. They have all the stuff you need. But in my opinion, they will start the altar. It only take 8 days for an altar to be valid. By the way, Hanukkah, right? People have such an objection to the Hanukkah. They have no idea what the heck it means. The Hanukkah is not about the oil. That was the legend. The Hanukkah represents the 8 days to make an altar valid. But there's 9 branches because one of them is the one that lights the other ones. So the 8 branches is basically about each day represents one day of the altar being dedicated. And you find this in the book of Ezekiel. It tells you it takes 8 days for the altar to be dedicated. So I know that once the altar is dedicated, it takes 8 days. On the 8th day is an altar to God. And then they will continue to try to build the rest of the temple. You need the altar first, and then you can build the rest. I don't believe they're going to put in the tent of meeting. It's just not going to work. I don't know why they keep coming up with crazy stuff, but that doesn't line up. They didn't do that when they came back from Babylon. So why would they do that now?
Yep.
I mean, it makes no sense.
Yep. All right. Well, once again, I want to thank you for joining this call with me. I know it started in one direction and went to another direction, but sometimes we just trail. I will put in the first part of this was about the grafting in process. One book, which, I mean, the scriptures itself is the best book you're going to find, but one book that I found was really good is by Batya Wooten, Who is Israel, and it talks about the grafting in process. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but yeah,
that's the first book I read back in 1998.
Okay, yeah, it's a very good one as well. But once again, I just want to thank you for this opportunity. I'm growing, I'm learning, and I know others as well, and I just want to help ask the questions and reach out and learn with other people on a lot of these topics.
Well, hopefully I said a few things that will be a different answer that you're expecting, and maybe will provoke you to look in different ways. What I try to do was more giving you different perspectives to consider when you look into some of these topics, because we get very much myopic in how we approach some of these things in the movement, and I think that's a mistake. And I'm hoping that I could bring maybe another perspective of how to approach some of these things that we're looking into. And how long you've been in the Torah walk now?
I learned about it 10 years ago. I went away, and I've been back full bore for just over a year is all.
Okay, so as you know, there's a huge avalanche of information, and there from calendars to like giants is they're everywhere. My recommendation to you, and you can do as you wish, is start learning the commandments. Each Torah portion contains commandments. This is the one thing I don't see many people. There are some, but I don't see many people as a whole studying. Last week there were 20 commandments in the Torah portion. How many did you guys cover? And that's the problem, because now we start speculating about stuff. Did we study did we study the book of the dead when you were studying about making the heart of Pharaoh heavy? I mean, this is something you need to think about. And why is it the destroyer in chapter 14? Make sure that the destroyer will not destroy you. The blood of the lamb was put on the doorpost to keep you from the destroyer. That's connected with a motif of what the Egyptians believe. God is making, again, counterculture. So I think learning the commandments will give you a foundation, and understanding the Bible as a legal document really helps you out. And my recommendation is continue to move forward, ask the right questions, be open, and study the temple. That will change your life. 279 of the 613 commandments is connected with the temple. So think about this. 45% of the commandments are all connected with the temple. So calendar, that's connected with the temple because it's connected with the new moon. And the new moon, actually, there were sacrifices in the temple. And once it comes from the civil domain into the temple domain, it becomes holy. Only certain people can render judgment on those things. Then you have arguments about the calendar. Then you have arguments about the name. Well, the name is holy. That's another thing. So again, the temple would allow you to give you a foundation about what God says, what is holy, who can touch it, who can rule on it, who can actually make a proclamation on it. And that really helped me tremendously when I started. So I'm glad that you're asking questions. If anything I could do to continue to help you, please let me know. And if you don't agree with me on something, it's okay. It's just we can dialogue and throw things out there, but be slow to judge and quick to listen and validate everything we say, and it'll go well with you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you once again, and just hope you have a blessed rest of your day.
God bless you, brother. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.